Marcus Holloway had exactly $1 left in his pocket when he pushed through the rain and into the store. It was 11:52 on a Thursday night. His car was dead at the intersection of Crestwood and 9th, the alternator finally giving out the way he'd known it would since October. The rain soaked through the shoulders of his coat and made every streetlight look like it was drowning. He bought the last scratch ticket on the rack, telling himself it was just 1 minute of hope before heading back to an apartment where the rent had been overdue for weeks. But the moment his coin touched the silver surface, the man in the expensive coat standing behind him said, "That's mine." Before Marcus could answer, the manager had locked the door, called security, and accused him of stealing from a billionaire. Then 3 jackpot symbols appeared. If you want to know whether Marcus kept that ticket or lost his daughter's future along with it, stay with this story all the way to the end. Because what happens next isn't just about $15 million. It's about a father who refused to move when the world told him to. Marcus Holloway was 39 years old, and for 3 months he had been running the same calculation over and over. Rent, utilities, groceries cut down to fit in a single reusable bag. The wire transfer to cover Zara's community college tuition 2 cities over. Zara was 19, his only daughter, and for 4 years his only child. His wife, Deanne, had died in the spring of a cancer that had moved faster than the doctors had promised. The last thing she said to him, in a hospital room that smelled of disinfectant and lilies, was, "Raise our girl right. Don't let anyone make her feel small." He had kept that promise by working 2 jobs when he had to, and never complaining to Zara about either. 3 months ago, he had been the inventory compliance officer for 42 Ashbourne Express locations. A job he had lost after submitting a report that flagged unusual activity in several product batch codes. A report his supervisor had reviewed, dismissed, and caused to disappear, along with his access badge and his severance. Since then, he cleaned the Delverton office building at night. The pay was less than half of what he had made before, but it was steady, and it left the daytime hours free for interviews that kept ending with the same polite version of no. He had finished his shift at 11:47. His car had died 2 blocks later. In the pocket of his jacket was a single folded dollar bill. Before he stepped out of the car, Marcus did something he had done every night for 4 years without noticing. He looked at the wedding band on his left hand. He turned it once against his finger. Then he opened his wallet. Inside was a dollar bill and a photograph of Zara at 8 years old, sitting on Deanne's lap, laughing at something the camera hadn't caught. He closed the wallet. He got out of the car. The store was quiet in the way that late-night stores always are. Fluorescent lights humming just off-key. Floor carrying the smell of pine cleaner and stale coffee. An older black man in a canvas jacket stood near the coffee counter, quietly stirring cream into a cup. He looked up when Marcus came in, met his eyes, and gave a small, deliberate nod. The kind of nod one man gives another when he means to say, "I see you." His name was Elias Whitfield. The tow service quoted him 45 minutes. Marcus stood near the counter and looked at the scratch ticket display. $15 million. $1 per entry. He was not a gambler. But 45 minutes is a long time to stand in a wet coat with nothing left to manage. And the dollar in his pocket was too small to do anything practical and too significant to feel trivial. He took it out, set it on the counter, and asked the cashier, a young woman named Lena Ford, for the last ticket on the rack. Standing near the back of the store, wearing a plain dark coat, was Conrad Ashbourne. He was 51, founder of Ashbourne Holdings, whose portfolio of retail stores, hotels, and real estate was valued in the billions. Earlier that evening, before Marcus arrived, he had told Lena, almost as an aside, that he wanted to hold the last ticket in the current rack roll. He had said it the way a man says things when he expects them to simply happen. He had not tendered payment. He had not taken a receipt. He had stepped away to answer a call. The transaction had been left incomplete in the way that things stay incomplete when a person is accustomed to the world pausing until he returns. Lena took the dollar. She processed the transaction. She passed the ticket across the counter. Marcus folded the receipt into his inside jacket pocket and was turning toward the seating area when he heard the voice behind him. Low, unhurried, shaped by years of being obeyed without follow-up. "That's mine." He stopped. He turned and found Conrad Ashbourne watching him with the patient expression of a man who expected the inconvenience to resolve itself before he had to explain why it should. Marcus did not raise his voice. He did not step back. He looked at Conrad the way a man looks at an equation that already has a known solution and said evenly, "You may have wanted it, sir. I'm the one who paid for it." At the back of the store, the office door opened. Bryce Holloway stepped out into the fluorescent light and recognized who was standing near his counter. He was 37 and had spent his career learning to read a room. This one required no deliberation at all. He walked to the counter. He positioned himself between Marcus and the exit. He told Marcus he had made a mistake and should return the ticket to Mr. Ashbourne. He said it without asking Lena what had happened. Without any reference to the receipt Marcus was already holding. The receipt showed a timestamp of 11:52 and a $1 transaction. Bryce looked at it and said it was irrelevant, because Conrad had expressed his intention to purchase the ticket, which in Bryce's interpretation made it already spoken for. Marcus asked Bryce to define expressed intention. Bryce said Conrad had selected the ticket before the purchase was finalized. Marcus said a scratch ticket belongs to the person who pays for it. Bryce's eyes moved to his wet coat, his second-hand boots, and the cleaning company badge still clipped to his jacket. And he said, clearly enough for everyone in the store to hear, that a man who had to count every dollar probably should not be spending his last one on scratch tickets. Marcus did not respond to that. He looked at Lena instead and asked, in front of Bryce and in front of Conrad, whether Mr. Ashbourne had tendered any payment before he had approached the counter. Lena looked at Bryce. Bryce looked at Lena. Then Lena said, quietly and carefully, that Mr. Ashbourne had not yet completed a transaction. Bryce pivoted. He said he now recognized Marcus as a former Ashbourne retail employee who had been terminated for filing a falsified internal report. He said it seemed awfully convenient that Marcus had appeared at one of the company's stores on the same evening the founder happened to be conducting a visit. He used the word convenient 3 times in 2 sentences, each time as an accusation wearing the grammar of an observation. Conrad, who had remained quiet through most of this, offered Marcus $100 for the ticket. Not as an admission that it was his, but as a practical solution to a situation he had already decided should not require this much of his evening. Marcus said no without a pause. Conrad raised the offer to $1,000 and said the ticket hadn't been scratched yet and might be worth nothing at all. Marcus said this had stopped being about money. He was the legal owner of the ticket, and he was not going to surrender it because the alternative was more convenient for people who had not paid for it. Bryce, reading Conrad's presence as authorization, pressed the security panel and told the guard to lock the front doors. Near the coffee counter, Elias Whitfield had not moved. But now, without any change in his expression, he had taken his phone out of his jacket pocket and was holding it at chest height, angled toward the counter. The screen was dark. The camera was not. He was recording every second of it, and no one in the store had noticed. While the attention in the room was still moving between Conrad and Bryce, Marcus reached into his jacket, took out his wallet, and looked once at the photograph of Zara. Then he took out a ballpoint pen. He turned the ticket over. He signed his full name in clear block letters across the back. Marcus J. Holloway. No one stopped him. No one moved fast enough. The signature took 3 seconds and was witnessed by the counter camera, by Lena, and by 2 people who would spend the next weeks wishing it had not happened. Bryce watched him, and then said, with the confidence of a man trying to reduce the stakes before they could be counted, that the ticket was probably not even a winner. Marcus set the pen down. He picked up the coin he had left beside the register. He looked at Bryce. He began to scratch. He worked from left to right across the 3 panels, slow and deliberate, the way someone moves when he knows the room is watching and has decided to give it something to watch. The first symbol was a red star. The second was a red star. Bryce said something under his breath. Conrad said nothing. Lena put both hands flat on the counter. The third panel took 4 seconds, and when the silver came away, it showed the same red star, and the verification machine connected to the state lottery system produced a 2-tone confirmation sound that everyone in the store recognized and no one had expected. $15 million. The display confirmed it in green. Marcus whispered a single word that Lena would remember later. Deanne. The silence lasted 3 seconds before Bryce changed entirely. He was no longer discussing a ticket of uncertain value. He was talking about corporate property diverted from its rightful destination by a former employee with a documented grievance against the company. He used the phrase chain of custody as though he had been keeping it in reserve. Marcus had not moved. He held the ticket in both hands and watched Bryce perform the real-time renegotiation of his own previous statements with the stillness of someone who had witnessed this kind of flexibility before. Conrad was also recalibrating, though in a different register. The amount was not, by any honest accounting, significant relative to his net worth. What the money could not explain was something older. His father had owned a hardware store in a small Ohio city and had bought scratch tickets every week for 30 years, always the last one in the roll, because he believed the last ticket carried the luck of everything that had come before it. Conrad had continued the habit after his father died, and the last ticket in this particular roll was now in the hands of a man who had paid for it while he was across the store answering his phone. Bryce told the guard to take the ticket. Marcus did not step back, he said, in a voice that carried to the front of the store. That he was going to call the police and report that he was being detained by employees of Ashbourne Holdings. Bryce said he was not being detained. Marcus said he had a receipt, a signed ticket, and a verification slip, and that he would like to exercise his right to leave. The police arrived 11 minutes later. The officer listened to Bryce, listened to Marcus, looked at the time-stamped receipt, and told Bryce he had no lawful basis to detain Marcus or his property. That this was a civil matter. That he was to unlock the doors. The doors were unlocked. It was the first small reversal of the evening. But as Marcus moved toward the exit, Bryce's eyes fell on the batch code printed on the back of the ticket, and his face changed in a way that had nothing to do with $15 million. He took out his phone. He photographed the code. He sent it to Everett Halstead before the tow truck had even reached Marcus's car. The message beside the image said, Batch 7C119, still active. At 2:14 in the morning, sitting in the back of the tow truck with the ticket zipped into his coat. Marcus felt his phone buzz. It was Zara. Dad, are you okay? Someone sent me a video. Is that you at that store? He closed his eyes. The old man with the coffee, the dark screen, the angled camera. Everything's fine, baby, he said. Go back to sleep. Dad, I promise. Go back to sleep. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, You're going to tell me the truth in the morning, right? He said he would. Less than 1 hour after the store call, Marcus's phone rang from the legal office of Ashbourne Holdings. They wanted to meet that night. The hotel lobby was the kind of place where the marble was real. The woman at the reception desk looked at Marcus's wet coat with the controlled expression that comes from training in the precise art of polite dismissal. Marcus walked past her. He took the elevator to the 4th floor, walked into a private conference room, and found 2 attorneys he did not know, a glass of water no one offered him, and Conrad Ashbourne sitting at the far end of the table. The man who spoke was Everett Halstead, 48, Executive Director of Ashbourne Retail. He spoke in the warm, careful tone of someone who had spent years packaging bad news in the language of a favor. Halstead said the company recognized the situation had become more complicated than necessary. That in the interest of a quick resolution, they were prepared to offer Marcus $50,000 in exchange for the ticket, a confidentiality agreement, and a written acknowledgement that Conrad had selected the ticket prior to his purchase. He said, $50,000, with a slight pause before the number, the way people do when they expect the number to end the conversation on its own. Marcus listened to all of it before he responded. Then he said, "You don't want to buy a $15 million ticket for $50,000. You want to buy my statement." Halstead said he was oversimplifying. Marcus said he did not think he was. Halstead shifted approaches. He said he understood Marcus was in a difficult position and said it with the specific gentleness that is really a form of threat. He mentioned, with practiced casualness, that he was aware of Marcus's overdue rent, his car trouble, and the tuition balance at Zara's college. He said Zara's name the way a man says a name when he wants the other man to understand he has been looking at things he was never invited to look at. Marcus went very still. "You investigated my daughter." Halstead said they wanted to understand the full picture. Marcus said, "You pulled her school records, you know where she lives, you know what she owes." His voice had dropped. "You brought her name into this room to make sure I understood what was on the table." Halstead said Marcus was being emotional. Marcus said, "I'm being clear. He had investigated his daughter." A man Marcus had never met had pulled up his child's tuition records, her school address, her balance, and was now reading them back to him like a threat wrapped in a favor. And if you're watching this right now thinking, "I would never let anyone threaten my child like that," type "stand your ground" in the comments below. Because Marcus was about to do something no one in that hotel room saw coming. And you need to see how he did it. Marcus looked at Conrad. A company worth several $billion is offering $50,000 for a $15 million ticket, when you could take this to a court that would settle it in a week. Why is that? No one answered. He let the question sit in the room. Then he said it again, differently. "What is it about this ticket you need to make disappear?" The two attorneys looked at their folders. Halstead said Marcus should consider the alternative. Litigation with a company of Ashbourne's resources could run for many years, while any prize payment remained frozen. Conrad spoke then, quietly, and said, "Taking the money is the smart play." Marcus looked at him for a moment. "Rich men," he said, "have a particular talent for calling a poor man's surrender the smart choice." He stood. He gathered the ticket, the receipt, and the verification slip. He put them inside his jacket. Before he walked out, he looked at the batch code printed on the ticket's back. 7C119. And he recognized the sequence. He had built the spreadsheet himself. He had submitted the report 3 months ago. He had never gotten it back. The ticket was worth more than $15 million. It was worth exactly as much as the truth he had been fired for telling. 3 months before that rainy Thursday, running a routine reconciliation on lottery product inventory, Marcus had found something that did not fit. 11 batches of scratch tickets had been reported as destroyed following a flooding incident. Written off entirely. 6 weeks later, point-of-sale data showed revenue from batch codes that matched the destroyed inventory. Tickets reported as non-existent were generating sales. He pulled the data going back 14 months. The pattern was deliberate. Halstead's department had been filing destruction certifications on lottery batches, allowing Ashbourne Retail to avoid remitting unsold ticket revenue to the state. The batches were then transferred by truck, with modified shipping manifests, to stores that ran a portion of their lottery sales-off system. The money was divided among store managers, regional coordinators, and at least one shell company registered in the name of a relative of Halstead's. Batch 7C11 had been among the certified destroyed batches. It should not have existed anywhere. Marcus compiled everything into a 12-page compliance report. Within 72 hours, his system access was suspended. Within a week, he was terminated. Halstead had signed the authorization. The data files were deleted from the company server. The only copy that still existed was in a personal email he had sent to himself the morning before submitting the report, because years of compliance work had taught him never to be the only person holding his own receipts. By 7 the next morning, Elias Whitfield's video had been posted to a small community account with fewer than 4,000 followers. By 9, it had been reshared by 3 larger accounts. By 11, it was trending under the hashtag #StandWithMarcus. The video was 38 seconds long. It showed Marcus in his cleaning company jacket at the counter. It showed Bryce blocking the exit. It showed the words "spending your last dollar" on a scratch ticket, leaving Bryce's mouth in perfect audio clarity. And it showed Marcus's face, which did not change, which did not react, which simply looked back at Bryce the way a man looks at something he has already decided not to give any more of himself to. The public did not need context to understand the video. It understood it on sight. Marcus found Ivy Bennett through a legal aid referral. She was 43, a civil attorney who had spent 8 years in a prosecutor's office. Her first impression of the case was that it was a straightforward property dispute. Her second, formed 40 minutes into the first meeting when Marcus spread batch documentation across the table, was that it was not. She filed an emergency motion that same night and submitted a data preservation request to the State Lottery Commission. State Lottery investigator Nolan Pierce was assigned the inquiry on Friday morning. His preliminary review confirmed that the destruction certification for batch 7C119 had been signed by a compliance officer handpicked by Halstead the previous spring. The batch had been officially non-existent for 8 months. The verification machine on Crestwood had read it as fully valid. That discrepancy had only one explanation, and it was not an accident. Ivy told Marcus what the evidence was beginning to add up to. "They thought you were holding a winning scratch ticket," she said. "What you're actually holding is the document that proves you were right about everything." The story that appeared the following morning had been given to a reporter by someone inside Halstead's communications chain. It described a former Ashbourne employee who had allegedly taken a lottery ticket intended for another customer. The piece used the word "alleged" 12 times. It included a photograph of Marcus's car taken from an angle that made him look furtive rather than simply wet. By midday, the photograph had circulated. But by then, so had Elias Whitfield's video. The two versions were now competing in real time. The cleaning company called that afternoon and paused his assignments. His landlord sent written notice. Zara called from school crying. She said her roommate had shown her the article. "Dad, I don't understand what's happening." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "I'm coming to see you tomorrow." She said he did not have to. He said, "I do." He drove the 2 hours in a rental car he could not afford, met Zara at the campus coffee shop, and told her the whole thing from the beginning. The report, the termination, the ticket, the batch code, what Halstead had said in the hotel about her tuition. The video. Zara listened. She did not interrupt. When he was finished, she said, "Dad, you could have taken the $50,000. You would have paid the rent and my tuition and fixed the car." "I know, so why didn't you?" He looked at her for a long time. "Because I'm trying to raise you a certain way. And I can't teach you how to stand up for yourself by sitting down every time someone with more money tells me to. Some things are worth more than what they'll pay you to walk away from." She reached across the table and took his hand. "Then don't take the $50,000. Ivy told Marcus the correct response to a narrative designed to make him look opportunistic was not anger and was not silence. It was evidence. They released 3 items: the time-stamped receipt, a notarized copy of the signed ticket, a statement from the State Lottery Commission confirming no completed transaction from Conrad Ashbourne existed in the store's records for that evening. By evening, the coverage had begun to fracture. 2 days after the initial story ran, Marcus's phone rang from an unfamiliar number. The caller was Lena Ford. Lena said Bryce had shown her a document and told her to sign it. A written statement asserting that the ticket had been held at the register for Conrad Ashbourne prior to Marcus's arrival. and that the sale to Marcus had been a processing error. She had not signed it. Bryce had told her that her continued employment depended on the decision she made. Lena also said she had heard Bryce, in the minutes after the store emptied Thursday night, make a call from the back office that began with the words, "The 7C batch is still out there." Marcus asked whether Lena would be willing to repeat what she had said in a formal proceeding. There was a pause. Then she said, yes, Ivy had Lena formally designated as a protected witness under the state's whistleblower statute within 24 hours. Marcus then filed 3 separate complaints, one for unlawful detention, one for retaliation dating back to his termination, and one for witness tampering. The 3 complaints together changed the case from a customer versus corporation dispute into a documented pattern of institutional misconduct. The court scheduled a public evidentiary hearing. Subpoenas went out to Conrad Ashbourne, Bryce Calloway, Lena Ford, Elias Whitfield, and Marcus Holloway. That same evening, Halstead sent a message to the store's data security team asking about the retention schedule for external camera backups. The hearing room functioned like a courtroom in every way that mattered. Presiding officer at the front. Testimony under oath. A gallery full of reporters who had come expecting a corporate power story and were getting one, though not the version any of them had initially filed. Marcus sat at one table with Ivy. The Ashbourne Holdings legal team occupied the other. Conrad sat slightly apart from his own lawyers. Bryce Calloway held very still, which Marcus recognized as the posture of someone who had already done the arithmetic and did not like the results. Bryce testified first. He stated that Conrad Ashbourne had communicated his intention to purchase the last ticket prior to Marcus's arrival. That this constituted a reservation Marcus had overridden. Ivy introduced the machine register log, which showed 0 pending reservations at the time of Marcus's transaction. Bryce adjusted his account and said the reservation was informal. Ivy asked whether any informal reservation had ever been entered into the register system. Bryce said it had not. Ivy asked whether the register required a completed financial transaction before a ticket could be considered sold. After a pause, Bryce said yes. Nolan Pierce then presented his findings on the register data. The machine log showed that after the prize was confirmed, the register had been accessed remotely by a user ID registered to Bryce Calloway, and that an attempt had been made to insert a retroactive transaction showing a cash payment from Conrad Ashbourne predating Marcus's purchase. The attempt had failed. The failed entry existed in the log with Bryce's credentials attached to it. Lena Ford testified next. She said Conrad had told her he wanted the last ticket but had not paid for it. That when Marcus arrived and paid, she had processed it as a valid transaction. When the Ashbourne team suggested she was a junior employee trying to deflect responsibility, Lena said, "I didn't make an error. I processed a transaction from the customer who paid." Ivy let that stand without addition. Elias Whitfield was called next. He walked to the witness table without hurry, sat down, and confirmed his name and address. He was 72. He said he had watched Marcus buy the ticket. He said he had watched Conrad, who had returned from a phone call after the sale was complete, tell Marcus the ticket was his. He said he had watched Bryce lock the front door. The Ashbourne attorney asked why he had not intervened. Elias looked at the attorney and said, "Because I was doing something more useful." He then produced his phone and, with the court's permission, played the video he had recorded. It captured every relevant exchange, including the moment Bryce told the guard to take the ticket. When the video finished, the Ashbourne attorney had no further questions. Nolan Pierce then presented the final piece of evidence, the external server backup. The store stored camera footage locally, but the security system also transmitted encrypted backups to an off-site server every 4 hours. Bryce's attempt to delete the in-store footage had not reached the backup. The footage showed, in sequence, Marcus placing $1 on the counter, Lena scanning the ticket, Conrad returning to the counter after the exchange was complete, Marcus signing the back of the ticket, Bryce locking the door despite Marcus's audible request to leave, and then Bryce photographing the batch code and placing a phone call. The timestamp between the photograph and the call was 14 seconds. The motion to declare Marcus the sole legal owner of the ticket was granted before the hearing concluded. The presiding officer noted that the footage also showed Bryce's phone screen reflected in the counterglass. The number he called and the message he sent were legible. The investigation into Ashbourne Retail's lottery practices was formally expanded before anyone left the room. The expanded investigation produced numbers that should have been found years earlier. Investigators identified 63 lottery batches reported as destroyed by Ashbourne Retail over 4 years, whose codes had subsequently appeared in sales records at other stores. A portion of the revenue had moved into 3 shell companies registered in the names of Halstead's brother-in-law, a former Ashbourne logistics director, and an entity in a state where beneficial ownership disclosure was not required. The total diverted revenue was north of $8 million. Every finding mapped onto the 12-page report Marcus had submitted in October. Every batch code the investigators flagged appeared in his original data set. The file deletion had been logged under Halstead's administrative credentials, executed within hours of Marcus's submission. Marcus had discovered a functioning fraud, reported it correctly, been terminated to silence it, and had then ended up, through a coincidence of the kind that happens when a cover-up runs long enough, holding in his hands the one piece of physical evidence that could not be digitally erased. Conrad called an emergency board meeting on a Saturday morning. He let Halstead speak first. Halstead spoke with the disciplined confidence of a man who had spent 4 years building a story and still believed the construction was sound. He described the investigation as the product of a disgruntled former employee. Marcus had been invited to attend as a whistleblower witness. He sat across from Halstead in an Ashbourne boardroom for the first time, wearing the same jacket he had worn on the night the ticket was scratched, and not apologizing for it. Halstead said that what had begun with an irresponsible decision, spending his last dollar on a scratch ticket, had escalated into a misdirected inquiry consuming company resources that belonged elsewhere. Marcus opened a folder. Inside was a printed copy of his October compliance report with the submission timestamp on the first page, the self-forwarded email with the data attachments, the server log showing Halstead's credentials on the deletion command, and a letter from the Lottery Commission confirming that his batch analysis was consistent with their own preliminary findings. He said, addressing the room rather than Halstead, he wasn't afraid of me spending $1. He was afraid of the ticket, proving I understood his operation better than he thought I did. He set the folder in the center of the table. Conrad looked at the folder. He looked at Halstead. He looked at the folder again, and then at Marcus. And in the process, he arrived at a conclusion that changed everything. Halstead had not pushed him to contest the ticket to protect the company. He had leveraged Conrad's ego and his private sentimentality about his father's lottery habit as a mechanism for silencing the one person who had documented the fraud. If Conrad had succeeded in getting Marcus to sign the confidentiality agreement, Halstead could have ensured the batch was never examined. Conrad had been used as a shield without being told he was holding one. He turned to the head of corporate security and said to lock Halstead's system access before anyone left the building. Halstead said it was an overreaction. He was still saying this when 2 investigators came through the door. Before the entire board, Conrad Ashbourne said, "I was wrong to claim that ticket was mine." Marcus looked at him and said, "You don't only need to say that to me." The press conference was held the following Tuesday in a venue chosen by the Lottery Commission and the court rather than by Ashbourne Holdings. Conrad Ashbourne was seated at a table rather than standing at a podium of his choosing. The Commission's findings confirmed that Marcus Holloway was the sole lawful owner of the winning ticket in the amount of $15 million. Bryce Calloway had been terminated that morning. Everett Halstead had been suspended, his credentials revoked, and the shell company accounts frozen by court order. Conrad read a prepared statement. He said he had not paid for the ticket. He had not received a receipt. He had not held it before Marcus purchased it. He said the company had exercised institutional pressure against a private citizen who had done nothing wrong. He said Marcus's compliance report should have been acted on rather than suppressed. He said he was sorry. He said it to the cameras and then to Marcus. Marcus received the apology without warmth or coldness, which was the appropriate temperature for an apology made necessary by evidence rather than conscience. A reporter asked Conrad why he had initially insisted the ticket was his. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Because I have lived too long in a world where people move when I speak." Marcus leaned forward slightly and said, "This time the person standing in front of you didn't move." He then stated 4 requirements of Ashbourne Holdings for the public record: full reimbursement of legal costs, compensatory damages for the termination and the press campaign, an independent whistleblower protection office reporting directly to the board, and the public release of the full investigative findings. Conrad accepted all 4. A reporter caught Zara as she was leaving the venue with her father. She had come in from school for the weekend, wearing her college hoodie, her father's steadiness in her shoulders. The reporter asked, "What do you think of your father?" Zara stopped. She looked at Marcus, standing a few feet away. Then she said, "He showed me what a father is supposed to be." The clip ran on every network by the end of the day. Lena Ford was promoted to assistant store manager at the Ashbourne Express on Crestwood, which reopened 2 months later under new district management. Elias Whitfield was interviewed by a local paper about why he had recorded the video. He said, "Because I've been in that man's shoes. And I decided a long time ago that if I was ever in a store when someone else was in those shoes, I wasn't going to be the man who looked away." Marcus received the lottery funds 4 months after the hearing. He did not buy a house. He paid the overdue rent through the end of the lease. He cleared the remaining balance on Zara's tuition. He bought a reliable used car. He put a portion of the money into accounts not to be touched for 10 years because he had watched enough people's luck run out the moment they stopped paying attention to it. 3 months later, he registered a company called Holloway Integrity Partners, focused on internal audit services and whistleblower representation for mid-size retail operations. The same skills, the same methodology, applied without a management layer that could delete the results. Ivy Bennett agreed to serve as outside counsel. Nolan Pierce, retired from the Lottery Commission, agreed to consult. Elias Whitfield was invited to sit on an advisory board. He accepted, on the condition that meetings not be scheduled before 10 in the morning. Conrad approached Marcus about returning to Ashbourne Holdings. He used the phrase leadership role. Marcus said he would not be working for him. Conrad asked whether he would consider a different arrangement. Marcus said he would consider an independent auditing contract, reporting directly to the board. Not to Conrad. Not to whoever replaced Halstead. Not to anyone whose compensation was tied to the findings. Conrad considered this for a day and agreed. The arrangement was not friendship and not gratitude. It was a business relationship between 2 men who had a precise understanding of what each of them was capable of. The Ashbourne Express on Crestwood was the first location audited under the new agreement. The audit found 3 procedural gaps in the lottery product tracking system that created conditions for something similar to develop undetected. The gaps were reported to the board and corrected within 60 days. It was exactly the outcome Marcus's October report had been designed to produce. The outcome that had been buried. The outcome that had cost him a job and 3 months of financial arithmetic that leaves marks on a man. It had taken longer to arrive than it should have. But it had arrived. Zara came home for a long weekend in the spring. She sat in her father's new office, a rented space that smelled of clean air and new paint, and looked at the framed document on the wall. The October compliance report, the copy Marcus had emailed to himself the morning before submitting it, mounted beside the certificate of incorporation for Holloway Integrity Partners. She asked whether they had won because of the ticket. Marcus reached behind his desk and brought out a small wooden frame containing a single folded dollar bill. The one Conrad Ashbourne had returned to him after the press conference with a handwritten note that said only, "The night it started." He turned it and slid it across the desk to Zara. "This isn't for me," he said. "It's for you. So you'll know what to do when someone tells you to move." Zara looked at the dollar. She looked at her father. Then she reached out and took the frame in both hands and held it the way a person holds something they intend to keep for the rest of their life. Outside the window, it was raining again, softer than it had been that Thursday in November. Marcus watched it fall against the glass and thought about a car that had died at Crestwood and 9th, and a woman in a hospital room who had told him to raise their girl right. The ticket had been luck. Every step taken after the ticket had been something else entirely. One billionaire had once believed the world would rearrange itself the moment he said, "That ticket is mine." But a father with $1 left had refused to step aside, and in doing so, had made every dollar that followed mean exactly what it was supposed to mean. And when his daughter asked him, years later, what he had taught her that mattered most, he did not point to the money. He pointed to the frame on her wall.